Hey folks, this is Kalani. We have our first round of major class changes for the War Within expansion, including a lot of buffs and nerfs for classes that definitely needed a nudge one way or another. We also have more information about the new Warbound gear that we can get in the War Within, how it's going to drop, what kind of loot it can be, and how high an item level we can get from this new bonus loot. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. First up this week, let's go over the first class balance tuning changes for this expansion. There are a lot of buffs, a lot of nerfs, and some classes will definitely be a little sad when all is said and done. To start with, Frost Death Knights are going to see a couple of nerfs. Frost Strike damage is down 6%, Obliterate damage is down 6% too, Icy Death Torrent was nerfed by 10%, and then Glacial Advance damage was also knocked down by 10%. Most of these changes will not apply to PvP though, so just some slight damage reductions for Frost Death Knights in PvE. That's all for the Death Knights this week. So moving on to the Druids, Balance will finally be seeing a couple of much needed buffs after a quick nerf to Umbral Intensity. The Wrath damage bonus was reduced down to 20 and 40%, and the Starfire damage was reduced to 15 and 30%, but Star Surge was buffed up by 12%, and Starfall was buffed up by 20%, so your spenders should be doing quite a bit more damage, even though your filler spells were nerfed slightly. Harmony of the Heavens also stacks up faster. It's now 2% per proc with a max of 6%, up from 1% per proc with a max of 5%, and then Feral had a quick change as well. Blood Talent and Lying Strength now also increase the damage of Rampant Ferocity, so that's going to be nice. Evokers are up next with some buffs for Devastation. All of their spells and ability damage will be increased by 6%, so a nice buff across the board there. Firestorm damage is up 20%, and its duration was reduced down to 10 seconds from 12. I don't really think this will change much though. I don't think any builds have really run with Firestorm in a very long time. It's a very pretty spell, it just doesn't seem powerful enough. Maybe some more buffs could get it to a good place. Flame Shaper will also see a pretty big buff, Engulf damage has been increased by 30%, which is actually quite significant. Engulf can hit like a truck if set up properly. It's just a shame that Scale Commander is so much more fun. Hunters also made the list this week, but it's only changes for the Pack Leader hero talent tree, so basically nothing for marksmanship. Vicious Hunt damage was increased by 10% for Beast Mastery, but reduced by 10% for Survival. The dev notes basically say Kill Command was doing too much damage for Survival and becoming too much of a priority ability, but that seems a bit odd to me. If a hero talent tree changes up your priority of abilities, surely that's a good thing and makes them more interesting. There are some more changes in here though. Howl of the Pack crit strike damage bonus was increased to 5% for Beast Mastery, up from 3%, and up to 11% for Survival from 7%. Furious Assault damage bonus was increased to 60% for Survival, up from 30%, and Cull the Herd damage over time was buffed up to 60% for Survival, up from 30% as well. So quite a few more buffs for Survival specifically. The mages haven't been left out, and it's a bit of a mixed bag depending on which spec you've been favouring in the expansion so far. Fire will see some much needed buffs. They haven't been doing all too great since the nerfs towards the end of the beta. Living Bomb damage is increased by 30%, Pyroblast damage is up 5%, and Flame Strike damage is up 10%, so they should be doing quite a bit more AoE damage specifically as we head into next week. The Frostfire hero talent tree saw a quick buff for fire as well, increasing Frostfire Bolt damage by 25%, and then Sudden Fury was nerfed quite a bit for Arcane Mages. Burden of Power can no longer be double dipped, which Arcane was making very good use of with their Arcane Blast and Barrage queuing. Arcane Phoenix damage was also reduced by 10% just for Arcane Mages, and then Arcane Soul duration was knocked down to 2 seconds from 3, which will give you less time to get those free Arcane Barrages off. Paladins have a couple of changes this week too, and they're for Retribution, which shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. Ret has been doing quite well for itself so far, but their Mastery is getting nerfed by 10%, so you're going to need more of the Mastery stats to get the same percent bonus that you had before. In addition to that, all Holy Spell damage has been increased by 5%, so it's not all bad news. Moving on, we come to the priests. Discipline will be seeing quite a few buffs, starting with Oracle's Preventative Measures, which increases Power Word Shield's absorption amount by 40% up from 25%. Atonement healing was also increased by 100% when outside of raids, up from 70%, so healing any solo content or dungeon content should be quite a bit easier. There was a bug fix for Atonement crit healing not working properly, which should also help out, and then Shadow Word Pain and Purge the Wicked damage were also increased by 20%, which will also translate into more healing thanks to those atonement changes. Shadow will see a quick buff to Voidweaver's Void Blast that's been increased by 20%, so hopefully Voidweaver will see a bit more play. It seems like Archon has been a bit better for Shadow overall so far. Shamans are up next, and Elemental will see a 35% buff to their Mastery, so that will further increase Elemental Overload's damage bonus, but then they're going to see a 6% damage reduction across the board, so everything will be dealing a little bit less damage next week for Elemental Shamans. Stormbringer saw some changes to Tempest. Its damage to nearby enemies was buffed up to 65% from 50%, but it will now deal reduced damage beyond 5 targets, so Tempest is getting the good old target cap treatment. Enhancement will see the same kind of nerf, except they're getting a 4% nerf across the board, so not quite as bad as Elemental, but I'm sure you're still going to feel it. But Elemental Blast damage is actually being increased by 12%, so again, not all bad news. Stormbringer saw the same changes to Tempest in Enhancement, so that will be target capped for both specializations, and then Totemic will be getting some buffs. Tremor damage has been increased by 10%, and Searing Volley damage is being increased by a whopping 80%, so that should deal quite a bit more damage when these buffs come through. And then the last class on the list this week are the Warlocks. It's a very quick and easy 5% buff across the board for destruction, so no super specific changes to any talents or anything, and of course Affliction and Demonology are left out of the fun. Now, all of these adjustments are scheduled to go live with the next weekly reset, which will be Tuesday, September 3rd for the North American realms. So if you're getting nerfed, you have until then to enjoy your power before it gets taken away, and if you really need these buffs, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait just a little bit longer for those power boosts to come through. Now, if your class or spec or even hero talent wasn't on this list, it's not too late. We usually see a lot of buffs and nerfs either just before the season starts or in the first few weeks of the start of the season as everyone hops into Raids and Mythic Plus and the metas really start becoming clear. That's where the big adjustments tend to happen, so if you're not feeling all too powerful right now, you will probably see some big buffs when the season starts up. Now, in other news, Blizzard gave us a bit more information and some clarification on a new type of gear in this expansion, which will become even more important when the season starts up: Warbound until equipped gear. This gear could be the most powerful option we have when it comes to gearing up our ults, because it can drop at very high item levels and you can freely trade it among your warband, so basically to any other character. So you can pop all of this stuff in your warband bank and any character that can use it can just equip it whenever you want. We've seen account-wide gear in the past, but it's usually been from very specific sources at very specific times in the expansion cycle. It was almost always used to catch up to the next season or the next expansion. But in the War Within, it can be an integral part of your gearing up process because Warbound until equipped gear can come from almost anywhere. The Blue Post specifically mentions rares can drop this gear, which I've seen quite a lot actually. Right now they're dropping Warbound gear on the Adventurer track, which is like getting free heroic dungeon loot that you can just trade around your characters. They also mentioned the Lamplighters supply satchels that come from the various activities in the Spreading the Light area of Hallowfall. The first one you open will always have a piece of Adventurer Warbound gear, so that's some guaranteed loot that you can collect. But then every raid, dungeon and delve will also have a chance to drop extra Warbound gear, so every single raid boss you kill, every final dungeon boss, and every bountiful chest you open has a chance to give you some extra loot. This Warbound loot is personal, so it should be yours and yours alone. You don't have to roll with it with any other players, and because it's bonus loot, you don't miss out on any other loot rolls if you happen to get a piece of Warbound gear. It's just extra free loot that you can then trade to your ults to gear them up. It's also not going to be just random pieces of gear either. I thought this might be like the Dalaran gear set, where there was a set that was just Warbound gear, and no matter what content you did, it dropped that random cloak or that random weapon. But if you get bonus loot from a raid boss, it will actually always be from that boss's loot table, so you have extra chances to get important items like trinkets or weapons. They also specified that for raid drops, the Warbound gear will drop about one upgrade track behind the typical loot. So for LFR, the Warbound gear drops at Veteran 1. For normal, it's going to drop as Veteran, but tracks the upgrade level of the boss drops. So if a boss would drop Champion 3 gear, the Warbound gear would then be Veteran 3. The same goes for Heroic. If a Heroic boss drops Hero 3 gear, the Warbound gear should be Champion 3 gear. And then for Mythic, Warbound gear will always drop at Champion 4. So there is going to be a limit on how high the gear can drop from raids at least, so that's something to keep in mind. But still, being able to get free Warbound champion gear to trade to your ults is kinda crazy, and this might help gear up your ults much faster than usual. If you get extra Warbound loot from the final boss in a dungeon, it can be loot from any boss in that dungeon, so again you have more chances to get those super unique or important items. And then any Warbound loot you get from a Delve Bountiful chest can be anything you could have gotten from that delve. I'm actually really excited to see how often this gear ends up dropping when the season starts up for real. If the drop rates are good, it's going to be interesting to see how players react to being able to gear up a character without even playing it. But that's all the news we have for this week, so that's it for this video. A bit of a short one, I know, but I imagine we'll see a lot more changes and more news as we approach the start of Season 1. But what do you think of the first round of buffs and nerfs for the War Within? Are there any classes you think really need some big changes? And how do you feel about being able to gear up your other characters through this new Warbound bonus gear? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching, folks. Good luck and have fun, and as always, I will see you next time.